Well, good evening. Once again, I'm sitting in the big seat, the big chair, the hot seat. So, hold all your questions for next week. So, I hope y'all were able to get one of these little handout thingies. I have to apologize. I was the one that cut them, but I cut them about 12 minutes ago. We had about 2 minutes until worship, or the Bible class, rather, was supposed to start. So, I did a rush job and did not do a very good job cutting them, so I apologize to those who have a little extra on the sheet and who have a little less on the sheet. The only thing that I think was cut off was this little L, but you can still read it. It's the plot to kill. We're going to get to this a little later, and it was a little different on my computer, but my computer would not hook up to the printer, so we had to jump it over to Michael's, and so I tried to have a funny fonts and stuff like that to help us memorize some of these things, and it all kind of was run out in the wash. But anyways, so here we are. We'll get to this a little while later. That'll be our summary of the end of John. But was going to try to jump back in where we were at in John 21. Where we've been, John has recorded Jesus' death in John chapter 19. If you'll look back to our little fancy sheet over here, Jesus is hung on the cross. And that is the shortest chapter summary that I put on there because I wanted it to be one of the most emphasized. Jesus was hung on a cross in chapter 19. There's some other things that happen while Jesus is on the cross. At the beginning of 19, this talk about him being the king of the Jews. And then at the end, there's this discussion about who is going to take care of his mother. And he looks at John and says, John, you take care of her. Woman, behold your son, and behold your mother. But I feel like that was the best summary for that chapter in John 19. Jesus is hung on a cross. Chapter 20 talks about the empty tomb and the resurrection. The resurrection and how they run to the tomb, they see that he's not there, and Jesus Christ is what JC, I tried to abbreviate where I could. I tried to put them all on one line on my computer, but when they transferred over, they jumped to different lines. But Jesus Christ appears to Mary Magdalene and to the disciples. 2 different times he appears to them without Thomas, and then obviously, we have the time when he appears with Thomas. We get into chapter 21, and the disciples go fishing. They go fishing, and they catch nothing all night. But they see Jesus on the shore. They don't know it's him, but he says, cast your net on the other side. When they do, they pull up this net full of fish, and Peter jumps in the water and swims after him. Peter gets to the shore, and Jesus says, bring some fish, and let's have breakfast. After breakfast, after eating, Jesus has this discussion with Peter, this reinstatement of Peter. He says, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And he'll say, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And that will repeat 3 different times. And at the end of all 3 of these, Jesus says, tend my sheep, shepherd my sheep, feed my lambs. I still have work for you to do. And so that was what we stopped off with this last week. This was really all we got to last week, was Peter has gone from boldly declaring, I am the greatest, all of these, even if they fall away, I will still stay with you, to a different approach, to a different response to this question. He says, Jesus, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. You know that I love you. He has a change in there, and then in there's a difference that Jesus will say to him, do you agape me? And Peter will say, yes, Lord, you know, I phileo you. Excuse me. And that will happen again. Yes, Lord, you know I phileo you. And then Jesus at the end will come down to his level and use the same word he's been using. Yes, Lord, I phileo you. Do you phileo me? Yes, you know I do. And at the end, Jesus will still say, I have work for you. I have use for you. So that's where we ended off, and we're going to jump into the end of John chapter 21 and hopefully make it to the end. We've got, I think, 7 verses, or 6. No, let's see here. There's a couple. Let's just see if we can make it that far. John chapter 21 and verse 18 says, truly, truly, I say to you, When you were younger, this is Jesus talking to Peter. When you were younger, you used to gird yourself and walk wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will gird you and bring you where you do not wish to go. Now, he said this, signifying what kind of death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, "Follow me." Peter, turning around, saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them, the one who had leaned on the back of his bosom at the supper, and said, "Lord, who is it that betrays you?" So Peter, seeing him, said to Jesus, "Lord, and what about this man?" Jesus says to him that if I want him to remain until I come, what is it to you? You follow me. Therefore this saying went out among the brethren that this disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but only if I want him to remain until I come. What is it to you? What is it to you? So Jesus, he has just said, "Tend my sheep," the third time, and he goes into this declaration about Peter. He says, when you were younger, you did what you wanted. You went where you wanted. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands. You will stretch out your hands. This is a euphemism or a metaphor for the death of dying on a cross. This is crucifixion. Stretching out your hands is Jesus telling Peter, you are going to be crucified for me. You're going to be crucified for me. And I think for each of us that there will be a cost. There is a cost to following Jesus. There will be a cost. And he says in Luke that you know, whomever has put his hand to the plow and turns back, it would have been better for him to not have started out anyways. And so I think what Jesus is saying is there's going to be a cost for you to follow me. And that's the same thing that he's telling each of us, that there is a cost for following Jesus. Whatever it is going to be in our life, there will be things we have to miss out on. There will be, things where we don't go, places we don't go, people we don't see, movies we won't watch. There will be friends we don't get to hang out with at certain times in certain ways. There will be things that we just do not engage in because of whose we are. Specifically for Peter, it is that there is going to be a time when you will be killed, you will be crucified for me. Now, again, based on the dating of John, on the first point there, that this is likely already taken place. This is likely something that has already happened, and John is saying that this was prophesied by Jesus. But when John is writing it down, Peter has already been crucified. Peter has already been killed. According to tradition, we know that, we have records that Peter was crucified, and he was crucified, again, according to tradition, he was crucified upside down because he did not believe that he was worthy of being crucified the same way that Jesus was. Now, granted, that's all tradition. That is not something we have in Scripture. But this, the next thing that John says is, Jesus said this, telling us that Peter was going to die on a cross. So, Peter's death was by crucifixion, and according to tradition, he was crucified upside down. There were other interesting things that tradition will say happened at the crucifixion of Peter, but this is the only one that we would say, this is found in Scripture. John is saying he's going to be crucified. Now, the funny thing about this, the funny may not be the right word, Jesus telling this to Peter is a word of hope. Now, you might ask, so if you're talking with someone and they say, well, you're going to die a horrific death someday, but you're going to do it for me. You're going to die a horrific death. I don't know if that's encouraging, but it's a message of hope. Peter, again, has just come off of denying Jesus when it really counted, when it really mattered. Peter wasn't there for Jesus. But what Jesus is saying to him is that when it counts, when it matters, you're not going to deny me again. You're not going to deny me a second time. This first time you weren't there. You weren't ready to go all the way. But Peter, now you are. live the rest of your life knowing that you are ready, that you are in, that you are devoted, that you are that person that is ready to and willing to go and die for me. Peter, that's who you are now. This is what I've prophesied about you. And so Peter can live the rest of his life knowing that, you know what? I do have what it takes to serve Jesus. I do have what it takes to be true, to not deny him, to stay true to him. And so that was Peter's mission, and that is ultimately what happened to Peter. So Peter, here, count the cost. The rest of your life will be lived in service to me. But Peter, the rest of your life is going to be something that is going to prove that you have what it takes to follow me. We'll get into the end of verse 19 at the end. The last thing that Jesus says to him, really, until Peter continues to be Peter here, is follow me. But we'll get into that a little bit. Verse 20 says that Peter, and this is the next bullet point up there, Peter still being Peter. Verse 20, he says he turned around and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved. So he saw John following them. He turns around and John is there. John likely might have even heard this conversation because he is writing it down. This is what Jesus said to him, and I heard it. I was behind him as they were walking. I said this. I heard them say this. But Peter, turning around, saw the disciple whom Jesus loved, saw John, the one who asked, who is it that's going to betray you? And Peter, seeing him, said to Jesus, Lord, but what about this man? I'm going to be crucified for you. What about him? What is his death? What is his goal? What is going to happen to him? And sometimes I feel like I am Peter. Do you ever feel like the circumstances, the situation that you find yourself in, that God is calling you in this circumstance, and you look around and you look at, well, what about that guy? I mean, their calling, their life looks way different than mine. Sometimes that's the way that I view it, is other people are either more blessed than me, or they're not going to go through the same thing that I'm going to go through. But Peter turning around, still being Peter, still, okay, I got this great follow me, and he jumps around and he goes, well, what about him? What about John? And so Jesus says that John, he says this, if I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you? Jesus tells Peter, walk your walk, and don't walk his. On one hand, Jesus is saying, don't worry about him. Don't worry about others. Don't start comparing your walk with God to someone else's. Don't start comparing how you're going to follow God, how you're going to serve him to someone else. Because what is that to you? Your purpose, your walk is to follow me. Your life should be devoted to following me, not looking around at other people and saying, well, are they following you? What is going on in their life? Your job is to be concerned about your walk with me. Where I lead you, you will follow. Don't worry about where I'm leading someone else. Now, granted, I think that we need to have a healthy dose of realism here, that he's not saying, hey, don't concern yourself with the salvation, the souls of your fellow man or your brothers in Christ. Continually pray for them, continually be with them, continue to try to help them in their walk as well. But don't concern yourself and don't make your walk about someone else's. Again, I think we need to understand that he's not saying don't care. If someone is obviously going after false doctrines, don't worry about them. You focus on you, and you be right. I think that's not really what Jesus is saying. What Jesus is saying is you keep your mind, you keep your eyes on your walk, what's in front of you, the tribulations you will go through, the things that are happening in your life, and not be concerned about what's happening in other people's lives as if that is what's going to determine what yours is. Because obviously we're supposed to care about each other and try to help each other and teach each other. Again, if someone is going astray, bring them back to the fold. But stop comparing yourself, your walk, your faith, what God is calling you to do, how you are following him with other people. Just follow him with all of your heart, with all of your mind, with all of your soul, with all of your strength, because that's what he wants. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's what you do. That's what I do. And we don't look at other people saying, well, why is mine not like theirs? We just do it how Scripture calls us to. So John will set the record straight. Jesus has, Peter has jumped around and he said, well, hey, what about him? What about that guy? And Jesus was said to him, if that is something that I want him to do, what is that to you? You still follow me. And John, I just love it. He adds this a little piece in there in verse 23. He says, therefore the saying went out among the brethren that the disciple would not die. That disciple would not die. Now, I think it's a little bit refreshing to know that sometimes even the disciples didn't quite understand what Jesus was teaching. Maybe that's not reassuring to you, but to me, I don't have to understand nearly every single thing. Sometimes I will get it wrong. Sometimes I will mess up. There are messages that I have that I don't understand sometimes. But John, trying to set the record straight, saying, Jesus did not say that he would not die, but what he did say was, if I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you? If Christ wills it, he will not die. And so John was just trying to throw that out there, set the record straight, and say that Jesus did not say I was not going to die, but that Peter needs to focus on his own walk, focus on his own task there. Before we move on to the next section, I talk a lot. Does anyone have any comments, thoughts, or questions before we move on to the last couple verses?
Peter was kind of reverting to form. I don't know if it came from jealousy or curiosity, but Jesus was trying to get him back on point, and saying, you must follow me. Don't worry about where the others are going. Just stay on task. I think Peter had a little attention deficit issue. He would get distracted, and this whole section is kind of helping Peter stay focused.
Yeah, I like the way you said it. Staying focused. Peter, he is distracted by the next thing on the list. It's almost like he's chasing fireflies. It's like, oh, that's great. I'm gonna fall. Well, what about that guy? What about him? And he's granted, we don't want to be too hard on Peter, but he does seem to be jumping around. And I think what stood out to me as you were talking was Hebrews chapter 12. Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every encumbrance and sin that easily entangles us, and run with endurance the race that is set before us. In verse 2, fixing our eyes on Jesus, focusing on how we can run the race toward Jesus, not looking around at other people and trying to compare, trying to drag them along with us, but running the race, fixing our eyes upon Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Fix your eyes on me, Peter. Not on John, not on his walk. Fix your eyes on me. Fix your eyes on the prize that's Jesus.
Justin, there was an elder when I first came here, Joyce Harold, 40 years ago, and I still can remember him praying, Lord, help us to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. Straight out of Hebrews there. And I thought that's really what we all need to do, is keep our eyes focused, because the devil does distract us. There's just so many ways to lose focus.
That's absolutely right. And I think that's one of his best tools. Is he doesn't necessarily have to get us with the big sins, or even get us sinning. He just has to keep our eyes off of Jesus, off of doing the things that God would have us do, off of doing the work that we need to do for Jesus. We don't have to be big ass sinners to be following after Satan. We just have to be people that aren't focusing, and keeping our eyes on Jesus. But John will say, Jesus didn't say I wasn't going to die. Jesus just said that if he wanted it to, I wouldn't die. But obviously, we know that John died. Newsflash: John the Apostle, he has died. In case you were wondering, Rich.
We know Peter failed Jesus at the crucifixion, and I find it interesting that Jesus not only tells him he's going to die for him, but how he's going to die. Perhaps he knows that he feels bad from the failure and he's been restored. But he's trying to build his confidence. But I just find it interesting that he would reveal all that information.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, to know that Jesus basically, I mean, again, it's metaphorically, but he tells him, when you're older, you will be, again, it's more, even more tied to the words there, someone else will gird you. Peter's going to be a prisoner. Peter's going to be crucified for Jesus, and Jesus tells him that, which I don't know if it's an interesting thought there, but Peter knows, hey, I'm going to die by being crucified. So if I just avoid crucifixion, I'll live for a long time. But he's told, when you get older, you're going to die for me. And again, I think that's a big boost of confidence that he is not just bringing Peter back into the fold, as in, oh yeah, okay, we can deal with you, Peter. We'll put up with you, Peter. You come back in and you just rejoin the fold. But no, he's saying, Peter, I need you to come back in, and again, not just come back into a lowly position. Come back in with you dragging your heels and with your hanging your head, saying, okay, I'm back in here. But Peter, I need you with confidence, with boldness, because again, the same page that we're on right here in John 21, at least in my Bible, is Acts of the Apostles. The next thing Peter's going to need to be doing is boldly proclaiming, boldly leading the people of God. And yes, the whole tend my lambs, that situation is bringing Peter back. But I think right here is really what Jesus was doing is reigniting the fire, saying again, your leadership material, you've got what it takes, tend my sheep. Rich.
Knew how it was going to end. In this case, you don't hold back. You let it all go. You have nothing to lose.
Yeah, and it's that's not necessarily something that we deal with. I don't know anyone personally that has been persecuted to the point of death for their faith. But again, that had to give him some confidence of, hey, on the one hand, I'm not going to give up anymore. I'm not going to give up. As soon as, I know that when push comes to shove, I'm standing for Jesus. And that's what I'm going to have to go through. But I know I've been given the confidence, knowing that I can do this, knowing that this is what's going to happen, and knowing that I can go in with full assurance that I'm going to be on when those gates are open wide, I'm going to be on Jesus' side, Anyways, Peter jumps over to John, and John ends his gospel in verse 24, the last two verses there. John 21:24. Now, this is the disciple who is testifying to these things and wrote these things. And we know that his testimony is true, which is funny because, anyways, we'll get to that. And there are also many other things which Jesus did, which if they were written in detail, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. I'm going to leave it up there for just a second because I thought it was funny. He is writing this down, and I don't know if you see the irony here, but he's writing down and he's saying, and we, I don't know who the we is there, but I'm included in that, and we know that my testimony is true. I just thought that was kind of funny. Everybody knows I even know my testimony is true. So John ends saying that, this is that disciple. Again, he kind of not really names himself and says this is John writing this, but he says this is that disciple who's testifying, and we know that his testimony is true. And again, that's been a theme all throughout. What is truth? When the Jews can't handle the truth, they go off on their own way. When the Pharisees can't handle the truth, staring them in the face that they're a bunch of hypocrites and that they are children of Satan rather than children of Abraham. They can't handle the truth. And again, Pilate, when Jesus tells him the truth, Pilate still, he can't argue with it, that you are innocent. But he will say, we know that his testimony, the testimony of John, what has been written in this book, we all know that this is the truth. That this is the truth. So, I mean, I think that's a great way to end his book. What I've been writing about, it's the truth. You can take that home. You can take it home and write home about it. It's wonderful. It is truth. Now, this last thing on here, it's interesting the way that it gets translated, but it says, and I suppose, in the, I believe this is the New American Standard, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. So one of the questions that I thought was just an interesting thing to think about is, again, back in the day when they were writing all this down, paper and ink weren't nearly, well, not even close to as plentiful as today. So in their time, they had this great library in Alexandria, and there's a big fire that happens there. So libraries were still a thing. I don't know. There was librarians still back then. Great job. It's been around for a while. But there was libraries full of books. And even for them to think about how many books it would take to fill that library for them would have been a big deal. And if every little detail about what Jesus has been doing, if it was written down, I don't even know if the world could contain the books that was written. Now, I don't know, since then, I don't know exactly, I can't go back into John's mindset of the day, but I'm pretty sure that the world has expanded in scope at least a little bit in the mind of society. Back in their day, it was, the Rome and Europe, and they might have even, there was some known world extended into Asia a little bit, and there might have even been, down into Egypt and maybe even a little further into Africa. But, I mean, the world is a pretty big place. And John says, I suppose that even the world, we don't know, well, in his mind, he didn't know where the world was, how big that was, but he still said that every detail about Jesus' life would fill the entire world, would fill the entire books. So the thought that I was going to propose is, even if it was physical books, trying to imagine, the books that just, if every place on the earth was just filled with books about Jesus, would that contain everything that Jesus had done? But so I don't know about you, but a lot of books today are digital. Oh yeah, go ahead, Chuck.
I was just going to say, today, over the years, we've had numerous, unnumbered commentaries written about what this means and that means, and about this segment and all that stuff. But if you look at, if you think about all the people that Jesus interacted with back then, even a little bit, if they wrote their firsthand account, I mean, it's not a commentary, this is a firsthand, that's what I was thinking about, all the people that he encountered, even a little bit, it would just be unfathomable, the books and their manuscripts and everything that would have been written, and it wouldn't be commentaries on what people thought about something, it would be first-hand accounts.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That was one of the aspects that I had not necessarily included in when I was thinking about this. But yeah, all of the different things that every detail in this person's life and how that changed what they were doing and how Jesus was interacting with all of these things. But and just how incredible it would be to be able to read some of those things. Where I was eventually going with this was this idea that, in our day, last time I read a physical book, I think I had to do it in college. But even in college, for the last couple years of graduate school, we've had these wonderful things called digital books. You just get on your computer and you click the little PDF button and it opens a book for you. And there are, gigabytes and terabytes and humungabytes, gazillabytes worth of data out there of books, and it's like, I don't know how much storage we can have of all of these different books and things. But and here's the thing, I would suggest, again, even in the text, the translators have put this idea of, I suppose that it wouldn't fill the whole world if they were written. But I think that even today, even today, if everything were to be written about what Jesus, we'll put it this way, if every detail that Jesus did was written down, that it would still be too much for the world to hold. The world can't contain the amount of great things that Jesus has done because Jesus isn't done. Now, John is talking about how Jesus was physically, he did so many other things. He did so many other miracles. He did so many things alive on this earth. But one of the reasons that I think that the world can't contain the story of Jesus in its entirety is because Jesus hasn't stopped working. Jesus hasn't stopped moving. Jesus is still, there would still be things every second of every day that would have to be written about what the things Jesus is doing in the life of those who love him, in the life of those who serve him, in the life of those who are his disciples. Jesus is still moving, and he is still working. So have you considered what Jesus is doing in your life? Have you considered sharing that with someone? I mean, I think if there was going to be a more practical application for this last slide, it would be even other believers, tell them what Jesus is doing in your life. Again, this is a great thing that you could tell people that are not in the church of how Jesus, he's working in our life. Look at what he's done for me, what he's done in my life, how I am being loved and cared for by his church, how I am showing love and showing compassion and showing the fruit that is being born in my life because I have his Spirit within me. And he is walking and he is working and he is living in my life. Tell somebody about that. Tell somebody. Tell someone in detail, as much detail as you want. I'm a detail-oriented person. It'd be a while. But tell someone what Jesus is doing in your life. Make it something that is actively happening and not just something that is passively happening. Again, as we read Scripture, that's amazing. That's wonderful. Jesus is going to work in our hearts and in our minds and in our life. His Spirit is going to lead us. But he's doing something every day. And I want us to recognize that, and I want us to share that with people. Because that is one of the ways that we can be the most encouraging, the most caring people, is by saying how Jesus is moving in our lives to one another and to the lost. So anyways, John has finished his gospel. Go ahead.
Well, you're hitting on what he did. What he really did was set all this in motion. Every kind work, every testimony that was given, every one of us who are believers, every church, every building, every community that's around Christ, every good works, however big or small, when he said it was finished, he meant it. He has done everything that needed to happen. If you take it clear back to the beginning of this book, he created everything. That's something he did. You can't comprehend the enormity of that. It's impossible. So even John, in his finite ignorance of the computer age, wasn't wrong.
Yeah, there not only could many more details be written, but we couldn't understand or comprehend all of the things that Jesus has been doing. But yeah, I mean, and as you said, that it was a vast chain of cause and effect that starts with Jesus and it ends with Jesus. And it's in our life, the things, the wonderful things that we have done, the love, the care that has been shown to us has been done because Jesus started it and Jesus is ending it. And one day we will all be with him forever. So this is Jason's final thoughts on at least verse 21, chapter 21 rather. Chapter 21, these key words of love. Peter, I love you. Even in, as I was doing this little tiny paper, the new command I give to you that you love one another. Manifested that let's see here. Where does that specifically show up in this chapter? I didn't go over his slide. So anyways, Jesus manifested himself again to the disciples. So he appeared, he manifested himself to the disciples. Glorify, that Jesus will be glorified. Let's see where else that shows up here. Verse 19 says, again, I think this might be what Jason was talking about. Verse 19 says, Now, when Jesus said this, he was signifying what death he would die, and in his death he would glorify God. In his death he would glorify God. And then, the word know, these would be... The disciple, this is the disciple who testifies of these things, verse 24, who wrote these things, and we know that his testimony is true. And in Jason's final thoughts, I don't necessarily know exactly where he was going to go with this, but I'm pretty sure it was about how if Peter can deny Christ in such a huge way, a public way, a well-known way, and yet Jesus will say, you know what, I still have use for you. I still have a home for you. I still have a place for you. When I said my Father's house has many rooms, you've still got one with your name on it. There's still one that you're going to be in. There's plenty of room for you still here. And the power that Jesus has of forgiving someone that abandoned him when he needed him most, or in his hour of most need, we can be forgiven as well. So my final thoughts, failure is a part of following Jesus. Failure is a part of following Jesus. There's no one out there that can't say we've been in Peter's shoes before, been in Peter's boat before, been sitting in there in Peter's sandals, I don't know, in his coat. We've been there before. We've all failed. We've all walked away. There are times when we should have said something. There are times we should have walked with God. There are times we should have turned away from sin. There are times when we didn't tell the truth. There are times when we, maybe even in our own lives, denied that we were a follower of God. But failure is a part of following Jesus, and Jesus confronts our weaknesses. Jesus says, you know what? Kind of like Peter, he had this charcoal fire. He had this atmosphere that he was trying to create to say, you know what, Peter, I know you failed. I remember you have failed. But even in your weakness, I am strong because I offer forgiveness. Even though you have failed, even though you have fallen in this failure, I will pick you up. I still have a place for you. Tend my sheep, tend my flock. I am, as the good shepherd, tasking you with shepherding our sheep, shepherding my sheep. Again, I got that. Shepherding my sheep, shepherding the sheep of Jesus that again, will ultimately, as Peter will become an elder, be under him as well. Jesus confronts our weakness, and we, as a congregation, as an individual, need to acknowledge the fact that we fail. I talked a bit about this last week, but I see sometimes, and I feel it in my own heart, when I look at someone and I think, wow, how you have just messed up right there. You did pretty bad, and I would never have done that. And I don't know, feel maybe a sense of pride, maybe a sense of, I don't know if that's a good way of putting it, a sense of righteousness, of maybe not necessarily holier than thou, but the idea of, well, I would have never fallen into that because blah, blah, blah. When that's the exact attitude Peter had. Even if everybody else, even if that guy right there, even if he doesn't follow you, I'm going to do it. And yet Peter was right there in the same boat. And sometimes we need to acknowledge the fact that we are vulnerable to sin. One of the things that Proverbs would tell us is that young man, Proverbs 5, 6, and 7, young man, you're vulnerable to sin. You're vulnerable to the wiles of the devil. You're vulnerable to those things. Don't even go down to where you know the temptation lies. Don't even go there. Stay away from that side of town. Don't keep yourself unstained from that. Acknowledge the fact that you will fall to sin. And do what you can to follow Jesus. Part of walking in the light and staying in the light is knowing where the darkness is and staying in the light and not going there. But acknowledge the fact that, you know what? I am not above the temptation of Satan. And the final thing that Jesus says, and this is what he says to Peter 2 times. After he says, you know what, Peter, you're going to die on a cross. Peter, the rest of your life is going to be in service to me. Peter, when it matters most, when you're confronted again about following me or being my disciple, you're not going to let me down. You're going to boldly proclaim your faith, and you're going to be crucified for it. But this is the thing you need to know, Peter. Follow me. Follow me. Where I lead you, you will go. Follow me. Verse 19. He also says in verse 22, what is it to you? What is other people's walk? What is other people's path? What matters what is going to happen to other people? What is it to you? Your responsibility is you follow me. And that's what he's telling us today. Our failure, it's going to happen. Do the best we can to stay away from it. Do the best we can to follow in the light and follow Jesus. When we are weak, when we have failed, acknowledge it. Don't hide from it. Don't run from it. That's what David tried to do, and it didn't work. He did something wrong. Would try to hide it, try to cover it up, and it just led to more wrongdoing and more wrongdoing and more wrongdoing. Don't try to hide it. Jesus will confront our weaknesses, but we have to be willing to come to the fire. We have to be willing to sit there and say, you know what, I did wrong. Acknowledge the fact that we are vulnerable. But ultimately, Jesus says to us, walk with me, follow me. Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. So the end of John's gospel is what we have studied tonight. The very end of it, he says at the very end, my testimony is true. What I've written is fact. Now, granted, I could have written about so many other things. I could have written so much more. John could have continuously just gone on and on. He could have waxed eloquently for hours. But he has this short book, and he says, I could have written more, but Jesus is great. So if you look at this little sheet right here, I tried to make it Bible-sized. If you need, we can cut the ends, the tops and the ends off. This was really something that I was doing for me. Because Bible class is such a wonderful thing. And if you can hold on to great things for many years to come, that's one. I hope that happened. I hope there was an aha epiphany moment for you. I hope when we're studying John or reading John or being preached out of the book of John, you'll have some of these thoughts come to mind again. But this was something that I believe was a tangible piece that we can take with us from our study in the book of John. And so if you want, you can keep this in your Bible. I tried to make it Bible-sized. That's what I'm going to be doing, just so I can know the general context of the book of John whenever I'm reading from there. But I put the theme verse at the top. These things are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. That's the theme verse. So anytime you're in the book of John, look up and say, this is why John is telling me this. This is the purpose. This is what John is trying to get at. That I might believe, and that by believing I have life. I put in there that if you ever read in the book of John that this is the disciple whom Jesus loved, it is John the Apostle. John the Apostle. And so again, if you're reading in John and you see that come up, you can have a quick reference back to this idea that John is the one whom I'm talking about right here. It's me, and I'm writing about this, and he's faster than Peter, in case you were wondering. John, the disciple whom Jesus loved. I went back through and found the most significant words that Jason had on his key word search, and I tried to put them in there. The Word, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Truth is something that's really important all throughout the gospel. It's a key word. If I had extra space, I would have written lots of other things, but I wanted to make sure you can read it. Belief, these are written so that you might believe and have life in his name, and glory, that Jesus has glory, Jesus deserves glory. Jesus had glory with the Father that he will have, and that God will glorify him. The next thing I put on here was the 7 I ams and the 7 signs. The 7 I ams are in blue, and the 7 signs were in red. I tried to make it as close to our little fun moniker things as possible, but again, the font for Walking on Water was messed up a little bit. It didn't have the 3s there. I also put Nobleman's son is healed, because that's rather, focusing on Jesus healing and not necessarily the fact that he was sick. That's how we remembered it anyways. But the 7 signs, water to wine in chapter 2. The nobleman's son is healed in chapter 4. Chapter 5 was the invalid at Bethesda. Chapter 6 is the feeding of the 5,000 and walking on water. Chapter 9 was the blind can see. And chapter 11 was Lazarus is alive again. The 7 I ams, I am the bread of life in chapter 6. I am the light of the world in chapter 8. I am the good shepherd. I am the door in chapter 10. I am the resurrection and the life. I should have put the in there. Verse 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the true vine. The 7 I ams. And then I just tried to put the highlights of each chapter in there. Obviously, when Jesus is speaking, it's kind of hard to condense all of that. I am the Father, or one. I have the authority. Whatever the Father tells me to do, that's what I'm saying. I give you the Father's words. He says that many different times throughout the Gospel of John. So I tried to summarize that as best I could. But chapter 1, the Word was. I thought that was an interesting way of, in the beginning was the Word was with God. The Word was God. John will baptize Jesus in chapter 1, and the disciples are called. A couple of them are called in chapter 1, but I tried to make it as small as possible so it fit on one line. But there are disciples that are called in chapter 1. Chapter 2, the water to wine at Cana, and then at the end of the chapter, he cleanses the temple. Chapter 3, we have that wonderful talk with Nicodemus. Nicodemus comes by night as a Pharisee, and he's talking to Jesus, the whole be born again language there. How can I be born again if I'm old? Should I enter my mother's womb? And then I think that the middle part of chapter 3 was summarized with, the Son of Man came to save. John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. John 3 talks about the Son of Man will be lifted up. The Son of Man came to not to condemn the world, but to save it. And then at the very end there, John the Baptist, that's JTB, for all you out there. I should have maybe put a little, I don't know what you call that, theme thingy. What's that called? Key. There we go. That's the word. A key. I should have put a key up there. But JTB is John the Baptist. He exalts Christ. He says, Jesus, he is the one. He is the one that you've been looking for. Chapter 4, the woman at the well, the great discussion there, the Samaritan people that will believe, the Samaritans that will receive him, and the Jews that will not in chapter 5. At the end, the nobleman's son is healed. Of chapter 4, chapter 5, there's the invalid at Bethesda or Bethsaida, I think there's another spelling there on that name of the town. It's just the town's name is changed a little bit depending on the language. But then in chapter 5, I kind of summarized that with Jesus speaks for God, because Jesus says a whole bunch of stuff there. I speak for the authority of God. I've been given all of the authority. Lots of great things in there, but it's in chapter 5. Chapter 6, the feeding of the 5,000, walking on water. I'm the bread of life. And in chapter 6, I couldn't squeeze it in there, but Jesus will say, you followed me because I'm the bread. You followed me because of the bread. And in chapter 6, at the end, many will fall away, and many will not walk with him anymore, because he says, you're just after me for the bread. Chapter 7 was the Feast of Booths. When Jesus said, I'm not going, or he told them, you go on without me, and then later he shows up and he appears. There are crowds that are divided. Some Jews say he is the Christ, but others say, let's kill him. So they attempt to arrest him at the end of chapter 7. And in the middle of there, during the Feast of Booths, during that great time when they had the water jar and different things, Jesus will say, if you believe in me, out of that man would flow rivers of living water. Chapter 8 was the woman caught in adultery. And then Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And there's a lot that goes in with that. Jesus confronts the Jews. This is where he says, you say your father's Abraham, and he had many sons, but you're not one of them. You're sons of Satan. Sons of your father Satan. And he will confront the Jews about their hypocrisy. In chapter 8, chapter 9, the blind can see. This is the one that I probably did the most attitude, I guess, on. But, the blind can see. He heals the man's sight on the Sabbath. He also did the invalid at Bethesda on the Sabbath as well. But this was the one on the Sabbath, chapter 9. And they talk forever in chapter 9 about how he did it on the Sabbath. That's terrible. You can't do this. You can't be healed on the Sabbath. It was wrong for the man to receive healing on the Sabbath. So they kick him, the healed guy, out of the Sabbath in chapter 9. Chapter 10, I'm the good shepherd, I'm the door, come to me. I and the Father, that's Jesus, I and the Father are one. We speak with the same mind, we use the same words. He reiterates a lot of what he said in chapter 5 there again. Chapter 11, Lazarus is alive again. Jesus, again, will be prompted to say, I am the resurrection and the life. John chapter 11, verse 35, Jesus wept for the death of Lazarus, but he says, I am the resurrection and the life. And then at the end of chapter 11, there's a plot to kill Jesus. And I think it's in John chapter 12 where there's a plot to kill Lazarus. They're like, that guy, it was wrong for you to be resurrected from the dead, so we're going to have to kill you now. Anyways, fun stuff. There's a plot to kill Jesus and a plot to kill Lazarus. Chapter 12, Mary washes Jesus' feet with the nard and with her tears and all good stuff there. I put little dots there because it's the triumphal entry, which kind of shows us the timeline of the end of this is in the upper room. Jesus predicts the cross, even though they're saying, Hosanna, I'm going to die on the cross. Jesus washes the apostles' feet. Chapter 13, Judas will leave. Peter's denial will be predicted. Chapter 14, my Father's house are many rooms. I am the way, the truth, and the life. The Holy Spirit is promised that after I go, I will give you another. Chapter 15 is the true vine and how you need to abide in me. And because you're abiding in me, the world's going to hate you for that. Chapter 16 is the work of the Holy Spirit. That's one of the passages I believe Jason's preaching out of a lot. The Holy Spirit will convict the world, will convict us, and will work in us. He guides us to all truth. At the end of chapter 16, he says, even though I'm going to be crucified, your sorrow is going to be turned into joy. As we're mostly done, Jesus' prayer, chapter 17, is betrayal and arrest, chapter 18. He's on the cross in 19. And as we talked, 20 is the resurrection and appearances, and 21 is the reinstatement of Peter. So hopefully that's good. I think we'll see next week. We might have some curveballs thrown at us depending on what is going on. Paul might be here, and we might also start the book of Daniel. So look forward to that. It'll be great. Thank you for your attention tonight.